Well, hello again, my friends, and welcome once more to the Invisible College. And have I got a good one for you today? I think it would not be an exaggeration to say that if you can really understand this lecture that I'm going to give you, you'll understand not just the core of the Western tradition, not to mention, the purpose of Christianity, but you'll have the answers to the Old Testament, the whole Adam and Eve story, what that was really all about, what happened subsequently with the Ark of the Covenant, why Jesus had to come here to do what he did, and what that means for us today. And it cuts into everything else that I've done on this channel with regard to mysticism and esotericism. I know there's some lectures I've done which aren't to do with those subjects, but those which are, this is the epicenter, really, of the whole subject area. So please watch this one and watch it right through to the end, because it's going to surprise you. And also try to watch it several times if you don't grasp it all in one go, because it is the most esoteric lecture I've ever done. And it's the most relevant, really, and almost to the point where it's almost pointless for me to do any more. So let's press on with it. This one is called Mysteries of the Garden Tomb. And I'll put that down there, that's it. Mysteries of the Garden Tomb. Now then, if you ever visit Jerusalem as a pilgrim or tourist, you are sure to want to go to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Now you can see it. Those two domes are both part of the same church, and that tower there, it's all one big complex. It is a relatively large multi-denominational church and is situated in the Christian quarter of the Old City. It is well to the west of the Temple Mount, recognizable for its golden domed Mosque of Omar, the Dome of the Rock. Now the Old City is divided into four quarters. You've got a Christian quarter, you've got a Muslim quarter, you've got a Jewish quarter, and you've got an Armenian quarter. That doesn't mean it's exactly divided into quarters. They're just districts, really. And so the Christians would live in this district, mostly sort of Greeks, I guess, other Christians too, but you would have the Jews living in the Jewish quarter, the Muslims living in the Muslim quarter, and the Armenians in the Armenian quarter. And it's worth visiting all of them. They're different. Each one is different, as it would be, because the different faiths and allegiances in those particular areas. Anyway, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is accepted by Catholics, Orthodox Christians, Copts, and many other denominations as covering the grave from which Jesus Christ rose from the dead. Now you know the story of the crucifixion. Jesus is crucified, he's buried, he rises again from a tomb, and then later on he ascends to heaven. You know that. So that's the Christian story of to do with Easter time, Passover, and all of that. This is where most Christians believe the death and the resurrection took place, and there are reasons for that which we'll come to. It is also believed by Catholics, Greeks, Orthodox Christians and others that at one end of the church is the site of Calvary. By tradition, this is the place where Jesus was crucified. So the hill on which he was crucified is called Calvary. That's in Latin, or maybe it's Greek. It has another name in Hebrew, which we'll come to shortly. Here there is a large and very elaborate shrine You can see all that gold everywhere and all those lights hanging down, lamps, and beautiful place. And at the other end of the church is the Holy Sepulchre itself. The believed tomb of Jesus Christ is situated underneath a large shrine. You can see it there. This elaborate structure lies within and beneath the largest dome of the church. So you can see the round church round it, that part of it, and there's a big dome over the top. And you can see people queuing up. They go into the shrine, they can touch the stone. Visitors queue to go inside the shrine. They're able to touch the tombstone and say prayers before it. So this is another station, obviously. But is this church, hallowed and ancient as it is, really where Jesus was crucified and buried? The answer to this question is not as certain as we're led to believe. Not in my opinion, anyway. So let's investigate it and see why they think this is the place. Why all these ceremonies and this expense is spent on this particular church, and why this church is considered to be the centre of Christendom for many denominations. Why is that? Now, the claim that this is the true site of the crucifixion and resurrection only goes back to AD 324. In that year, Saint Helen, who was the mother of the Emperor Constantine, made an epic pilgrimage to Jerusalem, at that time a Roman city. So there you can see her holding a cross. She's actually known as Saint Helen of the Cross. You'll see why in a sec. Judaism and Christianity had been all but eliminated from Jerusalem when the Romans put down a rebellion and destroyed the city in AD 70. Most of the Jews who had been there at that time had been killed. The few remaining were either prostitutes serving the troops or slaves. So there are very, very few Jews left after the rebellion of AD 70. And actually Jesus warned the people that Jerusalem would be destroyed, and said, if you see it coming, run for the hills, don't hang around, don't even go back for your coat. And he was right. A second revolt broke out in the province of Judea in AD 132. Now at this time Jerusalem itself was still destroyed, but there were still Jews living in the province, the greater province of Judea. This one too was brutally suppressed, this time by the Emperor Hadrian. To ensure there would be no further trouble from the Jews, he banished them completely from the land of Judea and renamed the province Palestina. So this is when the Jews become total wanderers among the nations. They've been thrown out of their own country by the Romans, and then for 2,000 years nearly, or that's a bit less than that, they're left as wanderers among the nations. Hadrian decided to rebuild Jerusalem, but as a Roman, not a Jewish city. Since it was still in ruins, he started from scratch. He levelled the remnants of the earlier city and built on top of it, changing much of the city plan as he did so. He called his new city Aelia Capitolina, Aelius being one of his family names. So he named it after, he could have called it Hadrianus or something, but he called it Aelius, Aelia Capitolina, the capital of Aelia. On what is now the Temple Mount, he built a huge temple to Jupiter Capitolinus, the chief or father god of the Romans, and he put a big statue of Jupiter there as well. Jews were not allowed to live in Judea, and there are very few, if any, Christians in the area. Those Christians who would have been in the area, I suppose, would have been remaining Greeks or maybe some Romans that were Christians, keeping their head down, but very, very few. Thus, the location of the holiest places of Christianity were soon lost to living memory. So, it's become a pagan Roman city. And so they don't know, about the holy places of the Christians or the Jews, come to that. They don't care. They've rebuilt a new city, it's a Roman city, and it's looking back to Rome and to Jupiter. It was nearly 200 years later that St. Helen came to Jerusalem in search of the holy places, and in particular the cross on which Jesus had been crucified. According to later traditions, there was a temple of Venus built on a site which some people thought was Calvary. So someone must have thought, yeah, it's over here. This is where the temple of Venus is. I've heard a rumour it's under there somewhere. But anyway, Helen had this temple demolished. And in an ensuing excavation, 3 crosses were produced for her inspection. She didn't know which was the cross of Jesus himself. Remember that she is a Christian, so she doesn't care about demolishing the temple of Venus, demolish any pagan temples. She's after finding the truth about Christianity. So now she's got 3 crosses and she doesn't know which is the right one. What's she going to do? As a test, she had a woman who was near death brought to her. She was healed when she touched one of the crosses. Yeah, she touched, the first one, nothing happened. The second one, nothing happened. Touched the third one, and she was healed. And Helen took this as a sign that this must be the true cross of Christ, and so had it taken back to Constantinople. 2 churches were built on the site, one on Calvary and the other over what was believed to be Jesus' tomb. In later years, these churches were joined together to form the single building of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And that's the one we were just looking at. Since then, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre has been destroyed and rebuilt several times. And the most notable rebuild was by the Crusaders. They occupied Jerusalem from AD 1099 till the expulsion by Saladin in 1187. Nevertheless, not everyone is convinced that this is the true site of the resurrection. When I first visited it in 1972, a Coptic priest beckoned me into his little chapel and then pulled my hand to touch the tombstone for a blessing. He then asked me to make a donation. I was shocked when he pointed to scattered banknotes next to the stone. It seemed sacrilegious, and I'll just say a couple of words here. There was this stone, it actually was tucked almost down to the ground, and he sort of pulled my hand down and touched the stone. I didn't know what he was doing. And he said, tomb of Christ, or something like that. And there's all these banknotes, dollars and pound notes or other currencies lying around the tomb. And I thought, this is supposed to be the tomb of Jesus. Why are you doing this? And then I was with a party of other people. I'd come from the kibbutz, and there was a bunch of us. And one of the girls I was with in the party, she said afterwards, she told me she'd sat down to pray, and a monk had tried to put his hand up her skirt. I mean, what's going on here? This is not kind of the Christianity that we're taught, to believe in. It's sacrilegious and horny monks running this place. I mean, it really shocked me, I have to tell you, which is why I'm repeating the story. I don't know if it's like that now. Maybe that's all past history and it's all been cleaned up. But there you go. Anyway, not everyone believes that this is the place where the crucifixion and the resurrection took place. In 1867, the Palestine Research Foundation conducted an excavation outside the walls of Jerusalem near the Damascus Gate. Damascus Gate is one of the main gates to the old city. You've got 2 very big gates. One is the Damascus Gate, which obviously you can tell from the name, it leads to the road that goes to Damascus, or did anyway, probably closed off now. What they found was a rock-carved chamber, the entrance to which could be blocked off with a round rolling stone. Now I think this was all full of debris, this cave at the time, and you can see that ledge there. That's what you could have rolled a round stone around if you had one. Not there now. Quite common at that time actually to have rolling stones to cover up entrances. So you'd have your big round stone and you could push it, and it would probably take several people to push it to get it to move, to cover up the entrance. And that's one way of sealing off something. Because if only one person was trying to thief, is trying to break in, he can't move it, it's too heavy. So that's kind of, what's described actually in the Gospels, how there was this rolling stone pushed, to close off the entrance to the tomb. Anyway, they were a British Protestant-funded organisation and not therefore bound to the belief that the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was the burial site of Jesus, right? So Protestants don't necessarily believe that. They concluded that this site was much more likely. It came to be known as the Garden Tomb. It's in a garden. And interestingly, the time of Jesus, we're told that the tomb he was buried in was in a garden, and it was very close to the place where the crucifixion happened. This tomb was evidently made by Jesus' uncle, Joseph of Arimathea, supposedly for himself, but I wonder. Anyway, in 1883, Major General Charles Chinese Gordon, known as Chinese because he had taken part in wars in China, putting down rebellions, and he actually received a commendation from the Emperor of China, or maybe it was the Empress, was it at that time? I don't remember. Anyway, he was in Jerusalem. While there, he went to see the Garden Tomb for himself. He noticed that just next to it was a small hillock with a rock cliff face. It was at the side of the busy road which connected Nablus, which in the Bible is called Shechem, and was the original capital of Samaria, the northern kingdom. And that actually features in other places in the Old Testament, with Jerusalem via the Damascus Gate. In the other direction, it led on to the road leading on to Jericho and Damascus. So this rock face and the tomb next to it was on a busy road. Actually, it's right next to a bus station now. I mean, you've got this quiet garden. I've not actually been in the tomb. I've walked past it, but it was closed when I was there. It's one of the things I want to do. But my father said, always leave something for next time when you visit a place. So that one's on my next time list. Anyway, it's right next to this busy bus station with people honking horns and traffic honking, and really horrible place to be crucified or buried, but that's not really so surprising. It is well known that the Romans generally crucified criminals at the side of a busy road. Partly this was to add to the shame of such a death, but more importantly, it was a deterrent. It was shameful because you were stripped naked when you were being crucified. I know when you go in church and you see a crucifix hanging up there, Jesus has got a little loincloth round him and he's nailed out. There would have been no loincloth in the real thing. You'd have been stripped naked and hung up to dry and to be laughed at, and people point fingers at you and call you names and maybe throw things at you. It was not a pleasant thing, and it was done very publicly. St. John's Gospel tells us that the tomb of Jesus was in a garden, and this was near where he was crucified. Could this be the real Calvary, this hillock next to the garden tomb? There you can see the cliff face there. Gordon was struck by the likeness between this cliff face and a human skull. You can sort of see two eye sockets there and something a bit like a nose. He concluded that the garden tomb must be the correct site for the resurrection, and this hillock must have been Calvary. He wrote, if it wasn't, it should have been. I think he was referring to the garden tomb. If it wasn't, then it should have been. Yeah, quite right. Active service during the next few years meant that he never got a chance to investigate further. Yeah, he was travelling to various bits of the British Empire. He was a very high up general, was a major general, and he had things to do. In 1884, he was sent out to Khartoum, where he died heroically the following year. So he's known as Gordon of Khartoum for his heroic defence of Khartoum when there was a Muslim rebellion led by the Mahdi, who claimed to be the prophet that was preparing the way for Muhammad, I think, maybe. So anyway, that was Gordon of Khartoum, and he had identified this as he believed to be Calvary. Now, Ron Wyatt, an American Protestant pastor, was an indefatigable Bible sleuth. He was a real-life Indiana Jones, and I don't say that lightly, and all sorts of people put on a hat and like to play at Indiana Jones when they go and have a look at a tomb in Egypt or something. But he wasn't just play acting, he was the real thing. He made many startling discoveries, including the true location of Mount Sinai, which is actually in northern Arabia. I'll just stop there a minute. The Saudis at the moment are actually going to turn this into a place of pilgrimage. They're building a new road to go up to this place. It's in what was called Midian in the ancient times, the area of that top northwest corner of Saudi Arabia, very close to Jordan. They call it Midian, and the people who live there were the Midianites. And if you read your Bible, you find out that Moses, after he killed an Egyptian who he'd seen beating one of the Hebrew slaves, he ran away and he went off to Midian and he lived there for 40 years. He actually married a woman there and had children. So Midian was a place he knew very well. So it makes kind of sense that he would have been taking the Israelites to Midian. Where else would he go? And that's not in the Saudi Peninsula, that's the other side of the Red Sea. The true location of Mount Sinai, actually in northern Arabia, the place where the Israelites crossed the Red Sea, which is Nuweiba Beach. I haven't stopped there, but I've been on a bus and gone through and stopped at Nuweiba Beach. I was actually going from Sharm el-Sheikh in the tip of Sinai up to Eilat in Israel. And so there's a coastal road, and I was on the bus. And I saw this big beach, and I thought, yeah, that's a lovely beach there. It's now used for snorkeling quite a bit, I think. And, that is where he believed, or that was the place of the crossing. And he actually found a pillar there which had an inscription on it, which he interpreted that way. Yeah, he actually found chariot wheel, maybe more than one of them, on the seabed there. The sand had been a storm or something, cleared away things a bit. And it's a type that the Egyptians would have used at the time of the New Kingdom, when this would have all taken place. And you know the story in the Bible where the sea opens, the Israelites go across and then all dry and they get off the other side. The Egyptians come chasing after them with their chariots. They're going to drag them back. And then the sea closes over them and Pharaoh and his army are destroyed. So there was some evidence of that. And he found another pillar the other side. And a bit further on, they came to this area which he's identified as Mount Sinai. And that's another story. I'll go through that sometime maybe. Anyway, so he was a devoutly religious man. I have no doubt at all that he was divinely guided in these enterprises. In 1978, he and his sons were in Jerusalem. He was walking past Gordon's Golgotha site, talking to a friend. Suddenly his left arm shot out and pointed at the foot of the cliff, where there was a trash heap. At the same time, his mouth started speaking, saying, "That's Jeremiah's grotto, and the Ark of the Covenant is in there." This all happened spontaneously without his volition. Some higher power was in control of him. So I want you to understand this. This guy, he's walking along, he's heard about this, garden tomb and this Calvary site, potentially, and he's thinking, well, yeah, that's interesting, let's go and have a look. And he was actually only in Jerusalem because he had sunburn from being at the Red Sea. So he was recuperating there for a bit, and they went out. Now suddenly his arm shoots out and points down at this place, and he starts speaking, saying, "That's Jeremiah's grotto, and the Ark of the Covenant." And it wasn't him speaking. Well, it was his mouth speaking, but it wasn't his volition. It was coming through him. He was suddenly channeling something he didn't know about. And you can imagine how shocked he was by that. I think I would be. I'm sure you would be as well. Anyway, so this all happened spontaneously without his will. Something else was in control of him. Over the course of the next 20 years or so, he and his sons carried out a series of archaeological digs on the site. They excavated a cave under the scarp, and from there opened up a series of tunnels. Now, he's put various videos have been made, some by him, some by other people, about all this, and there is actual original footage of them doing this. And I'm going to put a link, or maybe even a couple of links to this in the information below here. So you can find these videos and have a look for yourself, see what you think. But anyway, he goes in there and he carries out an excavation. And he opened up a series of tunnels. Eventually, after removing huge quantities of loose rocks and drilling through blocking stones, he was able to find his way into what appeared to be yet another stone-filled cave. This was deep below the surface and exactly underneath the spot on Golgotha where he believed the crucifixion had actually taken place. We'll come back to that shortly. So he's dug down under this scarp, underneath where this skull face thing is, and he's gone down and he's found these hidden caves and chambers and things underneath there, which are closed off and nobody knew they were there, and there's rubbish heap in front of it. He had earlier identified a square cut in the surface rock which could have been used by the Romans to insert the shaft of the cross. In other words, around here. So the Romans, they've got this cross they want to put up. So what do? Then they have it lying down, and then they spread him out there, bang, 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 put those nails in and the nails in his feet. Then they have to haul the cross up. And they need a slot to put the shaft in. So they've already cut that in the rock, so that they've got a slot to put the shaft in when they're ready. They maybe had used this before, I don't know. But this is how they would do things. And they couldn't just dig a hole in the earth, because it's not earth, it's rock. So this is how they would have done it. And he found this hole, or what he believed to be this hole, that the Romans had used to insert the shaft of the cross. And you see, I'm sort of put an arrow there pointing at where that would have been. The rock containing this hole was cracked. And this fitted with the biblical record that at the moment Jesus died, there was an earthquake and rock was indeed cracked. You see that in Matthew 27:51. Evidently the cracking had gone right through the rock of the mount, creating a channel of some sort, linking the crucifixion hole with the roof of the hidden chamber. Now why he thought that will become evident as we go on. But imagine, so you've got a chamber underneath here, you've got a hole with the cross being stuck in it, and then you've got a crack which leaves a channel leading down to that hidden chamber. The chamber Ron had found was filled with rocks. Beneath these were wooden planks and animal skins. By clearing away some of the rubble, he was able to see the glint of gold inside the chamber. Inside the chamber were not only the Ark of the Covenant, but other treasures from the Temple of Solomon. Eventually, he would discover these included the golden table for the showbread, that's described in the Bible, the menorah or 7-branch candlestick, that's also described as in the temple, and the massive sword of Goliath with which David had used to cut off his head. That also was kept. Souvenir of the great moment that David slew the giant. He's going to keep that, isn't he? The next time he came back to the chamber, it had been cleaned out of all the dirt and rocks. Everything had been moved away, right? So he couldn't see all of that stuff at that time when he first went there. All he could see was vaguely, he could see some glint of gold, and then he had to go. Next time he came back, the chamber had all been emptied out and cleaned. Who had been in there? Inside the chamber were 4 young men dressed in white. These were angels charged with guarding the ark. Now, again, if you read your Bible in the New Testament, you'll see that there's the story of Mary Magdalene goes to the tomb to look for Jesus, and she goes into it, and the door's been rolled back, and goes in there, and there's a young man there dressed in white, and he says, well, maybe it was more than one, I forget now, says he's not here, he's risen from the dead. And these were angels. Angels can take on human form if they wish to. It happens a lot in the Bible, doesn't it? Maybe it happens these days occasionally as well. You read of people who say they met an angel, and the angel helped them with this, that, or the other. It can happen. And these angels were in that chamber. They'd obviously cleaned it out, and they're guardians. It's not just the golden figures on top of the ark that guard it, or electric shock from sunlight on the gold causing static electricity. There are powerful entities that are guarding this object, and the reason is that this is God's throne, or it was when he was sitting in Jerusalem. The top of the ark was called the mercy seat on which God could sit, and inside it were the tablets of the law that God had set up for the Israelites to live by, and they made a covenant that they would abide by these laws, and as long as they abided by those laws, did what they had said, things like honour your father and mother, don't steal, don't kill, only worship one God, don't take the name of God in vain, don't commit adultery, don't envy your neighbour's goods. All those things. You've read the Ten Commandments, I'm sure, at some time in your life. And anyway, these were cut on rock and kept inside the actual box. That's why it's called the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark is the carrying thing, and it's the covenant. Covenant is those are the laws, those are the documents. You said you were going to live by these. You don't live by these, then trouble. You've broken your covenant, so I'm not going to look after you anymore. You can be carried away to Babylon. You can be taken off to Assyria. I don't care. You've betrayed me. You've betrayed what your covenant was. That's what it's all about. So, inside the chamber were the 4 young men dressed in white. And these were angels charged with guarding the ark. He was instructed, that's Ron Wyatt, to take the tablets of the 10 Commandments from inside the ark and to photograph them. To enable this, the angels lifted the lid, which was of solid gold. He estimated its weight. It weighed about 700 pounds, which is nearly 320 kilos. Solid gold. Imagine them lifting that. Very heavy, but these are obviously very strong angels. They can lift that. He was told that he should keep the pictures private until the time when the people will be compelled to take the mark of the beast. Now, we discussed that in the lectures on the book of Revelation about the mark of the beast, 666, and what that's all about. Again, that number is tied in with Solomon, and it's to do with greed, and it's to do with the putting wealth above everything else. Anyway, we will all be given a stark choice: either obey the laws of God as given to Moses on Mount Sinai and written on the tablets of stone, or take the mark of the beast. We will not be able to do both. So when the time comes, and we will be given the choice, you either obey these new laws that we're setting up, in which case you'll have a number, you'll be able to access your bank accounts, you'll be able to do all the stuff that you want to do, or if you refuse to do that, then you won't be able to do any of those things, and you won't be able to work, you won't be able to get any money. We're coming up to that point, and this is the stark choice that's going to be in front of us. Not taking the mark will make it difficult or even impossible to trade. However, only those who do not have this mark will be able to enter heaven. So be very careful, my friends. Make sure you don't get the mark of the beast. Now, Wyatt died in 1999. The chamber he found has since been blocked off so that it is no longer possible to get down there. Meanwhile, the Israeli authorities and the owners of the garden tomb deny he found anything or even had permission to dig. It is therefore very tempting to dismiss his account as either the fantasies of a man who was obsessed or as just a dream he had when he fell asleep while digging. He certainly has his critics, and his work is debunked on Wikipedia. So I have to tell you this man has been debunked. They deny that he found anything. No, that's nonsense. No, well, yeah, he may have poked around a little bit there, but yeah, he never did all this digging. He never found any Ark of the Covenant. Now, part of the reason for that is that the Israelis don't want people going out there and digging away, trying to dig out the Ark. It'll come out at its own time, at the right time. And the people in the garden tomb, they've probably been leaned on, to distance themselves from this. So don't necessarily take the debunking seriously. This man was a prophet, I believe, and he was showing things that other people aren't. And believe me, when God puts his hand on you, you don't have much choice. Well, you do have a choice, but if you're going to go with him, you've got to go all the way. And he will have been taken and shown things, shown Mount Sinai, shown whether they went into the sea, shown Noah's Ark, and other things, the true side of Sodom and Gomorrah. And he found other things too. So, very remarkable man, I think. Not just a fantasist, although I've met plenty of those as well, I can tell you. On the other hand, there is another report he gives, which on the face of it is even more incredible than the possibility he had discovered the Ark of the Covenant. Yeah, we're getting into the nitty-gritty now, so stick with me. This is really, really important. This concerns the blood of Jesus. But before we go into this subject, we need to consider some more history. So please bear with me. I know this is quite a long lecture, but it's going to be worth it. As I say, I think this is the most important lecture I've ever made. Mount Moriah in Jerusalem is what we now know as the Temple Mount. It is where Jews and Arabs alike believed that Abraham, on God's instruction, was going to sacrifice his beloved son. Now, if you're a Jew or a Christian, you would say that this son was Isaac. If you're an Arab, you would say that it was his other son, Ishmael. I'm not going to get into that argument, but certainly the Christian Jewish belief is that it was Isaac. But, if you're an Arab and you believe it's Ishmael, well, that doesn't spoil the argument that I'm going to be carrying on with. An angel was sent to intervene, and he was stopped from killing the boy, that's Abraham. Instead, a ram was found, its horns caught in a thicket. Abraham was instructed to sacrifice this ram instead. And this event is told in Genesis chapter 22. So you can read Genesis chapter 22. It's all about this. So he's laid up a fire and he sacrificed the ram and he offers it as a burnt offering on Mount Moriah. Solomon's temple, which is supposedly was built on the Temple Mount. I'm not absolutely certain of that myself, but let's go along with that. Was a place of sacrifice. It was mostly an outdoor temple, the animals being taken to an altar for slaughter. This was done in atonement for the sins of the nation. So you can imagine this place was like a butcher's yard. That's why they had this great big bowl of water. I mean, you need a lot of washing going to be going on. It's a bloody business, slaughtering all these animals, spilling their blood and offering them up on the altar. That was what it was mostly about, offering up on the altar. The Ark of the Covenant, which was made during the Exodus, contained tablets of the law. I've told you that. It was kept within the holiest part of the temple. Now, the building structure, you can see, there had two parts to it. There was an outer part with a table with the showbread and I think one or two other things. And the ordinary priests could go in there and deal with that. But behind that was the holiest of holies, the inner sanctum. And that's where the Ark of the Covenant was kept, behind another curtain. And that was out of bounds to all except the high priest. And the high priest was a descendant of Moses' brother Aaron, whose name means Orion. Now, I've said this in an earlier lecture. Aaron is Hebrew for Orion. And it comes over to Wales, actually, as Arion. Yeah, Aaron. And he's also as Orion. And in Wales, Arion is the king of the dead. He lives in Orion, Islands of the Dead. So we have this high priest, priest of Aaron, priest of Orion. He's the only one who's allowed to go into the back room to deal with the Ark of the Covenant. Once a year, at Passover, a lamb would be slaughtered. The high priest had the duty of taking some of the blood from that lamb, going into the sacred precincts and sprinkling the blood on the Ark of the Covenant. Now, in 586 BC, the Babylonians sacked Jerusalem. They destroyed the city and temple. They also took away the golden vessels belonging to the temple. Jeremiah prophesied that these would one day be brought back to Jerusalem and used again in the rebuilt temple. Now, if you read the book of Daniel, who's one of the exiles, he tells us how in 539 BC, the successor of Nebuchadnezzar, who'd taken away the Jews, Belshazzar, decided to have a big feast. He was a bit of a drunkard and a loon and playboy, and he decided to have a big party, thousands of guests, and let's make it really fun. Bring me those golden cups from the temple in Jerusalem. We'll drink out of those and show what we think of their God. So anyway, so they're having this big party and they're all getting drunk, and then the hand appears and it writes on the wall, Mene Mene Tekel Upharsin. And the way I understand that is a mina and a mina. Mina was a weight, some big lump, a weight like that. And so you've got a mina and a mina, and they would balance each other. And then a shekel is a much smaller coin. You put that on one of the minas and it's going to tip up. That little bit is just enough to tip up. So it's all been in balance, but now it's being tipped up. And one way to interpret that is that the Persians on their own couldn't defeat the Babylonians, but they were allied to the Medes, and the Medes were a much smaller force, but it's enough to tip the balance of interpreting it. Anyway, so the balances are tipped, and sure enough, that night the Persians had dammed up the river Tigris, and they sneaked in under the walls where the water would come in to feed the city, and they were able to capture the city fairly easily because everyone's drunk. So that's how Babylon fell in 539 BC. So this is prophesied by Jeremiah, and one of the things the Persians did was to allow the Jews to return back to Jerusalem, taking their golden cups with them for the temple. They didn't want any problems with this God who writes on walls and gets upset when his cups are drunk out of, by partying Babylon. They didn't want any part of that. So they sent them back for the Jews to rebuild their temple, and they got the gold cups back. So this is a prophecy of Jeremiah, and it actually came to pass. The fate of the ark is open to conjecture. Some claim that it's in Ethiopia, others in Egypt, France, Britain, or even America. I think I've even heard being talked about being in the Grand Canyon somewhere. Certainly, I know people who think it's in Britain, in Wales, and other people think it's in France, Rennes le Chateau and all of that. Anyway, however, in my opinion, it seems much more likely that it was carefully hidden in Jerusalem, in a place the Babylonians would not think to look, Jeremiah's grotto. Now, the Temple Mount, where today stand the mosques of the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa, that means the Axis mosques, that's the one on the southern end of the Temple Mount, is where most people believe Solomon built his temple. They think it's where the Dome of the Rock is now. It is on relatively high ground, being a flattened table on top of Mount Moriah. So this is believed to be roughly the spot where Abraham was going to sacrifice Isaac, and where the temple once stood. Now they've got the Dome of the Rock there. That's what a lot of people think anyway. Underneath the Temple Mount and nearby parts of Jerusalem are tunnels and caves left behind after quarrying for stone to build a city. You can see one of those there, the Western Wall tunnel marked there on this map I got from somewhere. There are all sorts of other tunnels and chambers, and the river coming from the Fountain of Gihon, which is on the south side, near where it says Jewish Quarter there, down the bottom there. Off the bottom, it goes all the way underneath, comes out near the Damascus Gate and the northern end. So you've got all these different tunnels, man-made tunnels, that are underneath the city. Since the capture of Jerusalem by the Israelis in 1967, these have been the subject of intense investigation. The Jews are very, very keen on archaeology because it's their only way they can prove the veracity of the Bible. You have to search carefully at these sites to look for evidence that backs up what the Bible or the Old Testament has to say. So they've had a lot of evidence for a lot of different things, as Vast amount been discovered actually. The old city of Jerusalem was built from limestone quarried from the vicinity. There are quarries on the periphery as well as underneath. So you can see on that map there, you can see that that roadway between there and the red lines I put around the Temple Mount. That's all relatively flat area, but it's all been quarried away basically to build the city, the houses. There were quarries on the periphery as well as underneath. It's evident that the hill of the skull, or Golgotha, and I've marked where the garden tomb is, so that's arrowed there, was once just an extension of Mount Moriah. So you can imagine that this hillock of Mount Moriah went all the way across there, perhaps not high, sloping down, and that's been quarried away. The tunnel system below Jerusalem came out as far as here, and Ron Wyatt seems to have been guided here when his arm pointed and he exclaimed that this is where the ark is, in Jeremiah's grotto. Jeremiah himself was the most important prophet at the time the Babylonians were sieging Jerusalem. Taking the ark below ground into the tunnel system and sealing it up in a cave makes sense. This cave could then remain sealed until the time when the ark is to be brought out again. So they got it out of the Holy of Holies, smuggled it down into the cave system underneath, and then they've been able to move it out to where Jeremiah's grotto was. Ron Wyatt, who I feel sure was the reincarnation of one of the prophets, perhaps Jeremiah, or maybe even Moses himself, had one more duty to perform. He found that a now blackened, dry material had oozed down the hole from the crack below the cross hole and had dropped onto the ark. Right, so he's the first one to go into this chamber since the time of the Babylonian siege, about 2,500 years ago. The angels told him to collect some of this material. He did so, putting it into a small container used for film. He was told that this was the blood of Jesus and that he should arrange to have it tested in a laboratory. Now, can you imagine how this poor guy must have felt? He's scraping out the blood of Jesus, you're telling me that I'm scraping out? Yes, scrape it out and put it in the pot and get it tested. Accordingly, he took the dried blood to a laboratory in Israel and asked them to test it. I mean, he was in Jerusalem, so that's why he would be asking there, and he had connections. To their amazement, they discovered that while the blood was clearly human, it was not like anyone else's. We normally have 46 chromosomes, receiving 23 from our mother and 23 from our father. This blood had only 24 chromosomes. The 23, obviously from his mother Mary, were complete, including a single X chromosome, would be the female one. However, added to these was one Y chromosome from his father. Now, I've wondered about this, and I wonder if there was just this lone floating Y, and there's all these X, the mother's chromosomes, because usually they're in twisted pairs. You have one chromosome from the father, one from the mother, in twisted pairs. Would there be just, untwisted, all the 23, or would there be a second copy of those 23, except the X is matched up with this extra Y? Is that what was going on? I don't know. He's not very clear on that. Perhaps he didn't understand it fully himself. But anyway, he says there were only 24 chromosomes there. I wonder if there were two lots of the 22 from the mother and then the X and Y paired as normal. Anyway, that's by the by. Even more amazing was that this blood was not dead. What? They put some of the dried blood in saline and left it for a period of time. I think he says 72 hours. They were then able to separate out some of the white blood cells. So the white blood cells were still alive and had started multiplying. He found they were still alive and reproducing. In other words, Jesus' blood was alive after nearly 2,000 years. Just let that sink in for a minute. All this explains the extraordinary story of the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus and why he had to be crucified on that day and in that precise place. Now, listen carefully as we go through this. He offered himself as a blood sacrifice, symbolically as the perfect sacrificial lamb. This was done immediately before the feast of Passover, when, in former times, blood was sprinkled on the Ark of the Covenant by the high priest from the family of Aaron. Right, so Jesus' blood has gone down that shaft, down through the crack and into the chamber, and it's dripped down onto the ark. Now that might have taken it a little while to get down that shaft, so we can imagine that it was actually dripping on the ark after sunset, when he'd already been put in the tomb, and that blood is dripping on there after sunset on the actual day of the Passover. Extraordinary. The Gospels tell us that as Jesus died, there was an earthquake and the rock split. And it says here, and behold, the veil of the temple was rent in twain, the top to the bottom, and the earth did shake, and the rocks were rent. And the splitting of the curtain of the temple, I think, is symbolic of the ending of that period of the ark being hidden away for the sacrifice. It's now been transferred. That's not where the ark should be. It's not where it was, where the high priest should be going, because the temple they're talking about here is Herod's temple, the second temple, which was rebuilt in the time of Herod between about 46 BC and 26, 20-year period. So Jesus knew that temple, but that's not where the ark was. The ark was buried in Jeremiah's cave, and the true offering on the Passover was Jesus' blood dripping onto it. I find that just so extraordinary that could happen. And it can't be just a coincidence. This is all part of a planned ritual. And I've shown you how, in my earlier books, Science in the Sky particularly, how a lot of the things in Jesus' life are aligned with the stars, as above, so below. But I'm not going to go into that here. Read the book, and I will do other lectures on it in due course, perhaps. But anyway, so after Jesus died, the soldiers came round. Jewish custom required that the bodies of the crucified should be removed before dusk, because at dusk is when the next day starts. The Jews started their days at sunset, not at midnight as we do. They started at sunset. So the Sabbath begins at sunset, at dusk. So they'll go around just before to make sure that the bodies, the people are dead. They could take the bodies down. They broke the legs of the other two, but they found Jesus was already dead. When they came to Jesus and saw that he was dead already, they broke not his legs, but one of the soldiers with a spear pierced his side, and forthwith came out blood and water. And that's in John's Gospel 19, chapter 19, 13 to 14. You'll find that. It's in the whole story there. It seems likely that the rough treatment Jesus received before he was nailed to the cross had caused internal bleeding. You know, he was beaten up badly at the palace of the high priest, and the Romans also thrashed him and beat him and crowned him with thorns and did all this mocking. You can imagine they're kicking him in the guts and kicking him in the ribs. He would very easily have had internal bleeding. So that would be why he died relatively quickly. Within 3 hours, he's nailed on the cross at midday, and he's dead by 3. So 3 hours is a very short time to die in crucifixion. People could last there for days, and you would die from thirst rather than from losing blood, because it's a horrible business. There you are up there in the sun beating down on you, nothing to drink. Anyway, his abdomen and maybe chest too would have been full of blood and water, internal bleeding. The spear thrust opened his belly, and a mixture of blood and water flowed freely. It went down the shaft of the cross and through the hole in the split rock. It dripped onto the Ark of the Covenant itself as the perfect sacrifice needed to buy back mankind from Satan. So let's just have a little look again at Adam and Eve and what was really going on. You've got to understand that this is not meant to be a children's story. Yeah, it's an allegory. So this is even more amazing if we understand what the sin of Adam and Eve was really about. They were warned by God not to eat of the fruit of this tree, or it would bring about death to them. Their sin was not really pride or disobedience per se. It was that they did something very stupid. Now, when I was at school, I was taught, well, it wasn't really the sin of disobedience so much as their pride. You know, they thought they were going to be as good as God. It's their pride that brought them down. I don't think that's the full thing. I don't think that's really what it was about. If you've got children, and you might warn them, you can eat the raspberries, you can eat the strawberries, but don't touch. If you ever see any berries like this, you might be pointing at deadly nightshade. Don't eat them. They're poisonous and they'll kill you. This is kind of what it's saying. It's not just that they were being disobedient, that God had told them not to eat from that tree, but that eating from that tree has consequences, and the consequence is death. The tree stands for the pole of the earth, which points in the sky in the direction of Draco in the northern heavens, Draco the dragon. The pole of the earth, which is at the heart of the planet, had already been usurped by Satan, the fallen angel, represented by a dragon. So the pole of the earth is actually a kind of entry point for the earth. It's that's why you see the aurora borealis there. There's energy coming in through the pole of the earth, and also the south pole. But we're concerned more about the north pole because that's where everyone was living at that time. But concerned with the Bible anyway. So he said, look, don't go there. Go and have a look at the other planets if you like. Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. Yeah, great. Yeah, go and have a look at the trees. But that one, stay away from that. It will kill you. And you might be thinking, well, why would the earth be the bad place to go? It's lovely here. Yeah. It's because it's a place where you eat. Let's go on with this. Satan tempted them to eat the fruit of the tree, and this is quite literally eating. It meant that as beings, they became dependent on eating the fruits of nature. Without the energy deriving from the natural world of planet Earth, they could not live. So think about this. If you are on this planet and you're in a human body, you can eat from nature. You can eat lettuce, you can make bread out of wheat, you can hunt animals and eat them. Yeah, you can get your energy, your life force from nature. And the devil was very cunning in this. He said, look, come here, look, get yourself a body, live here, you don't need to worry about that God bloke, all that. You can come here, you can study, you can learn the truth, learn the facts. You can become wise. You can be as good as him. That's the temptation, to separate yourself from reality in a way. It's like if I take my computer here and I cut it off from the internet. Yes, I can put programs in it, I can store data on it, I can do this, that and the other. But I've no longer got access to all of the wealth of information and knowledge and everything on the internet. I can't use it. And it's a bit like that with us. By severing the connection, we not only, it was pulling out the plug that's supplying energy to us as souls, but it's also cutting us off from the knowledge and the mind of God and everything that's contained in there. So we're then stuck on this planet. We don't know who the heck we are. We don't know where we come from, what we're doing. We have to try to work it all out. We try to, but we become disconnected. And that is what it means. And not only that, we do get bodies. God, we're told in the Bible, God makes bodies for them, gives them skins to hide their nakedness. That's an allegory for being given a physical form. And so they become physical beings. Their souls are entrapped in matter, and they can't function without those bodies. And those bodies die. And when one dies, you have to find another one. So the endless cycle of reincarnation. We're held trapped here on this planet. Thenceforth, they were cut off from divine grace, the ambrosia on which angels and saints are nourished. Saints don't need bodies because they're connected to life's stream directly, which we call logos. So the saints and the angels are connected. They don't need a physical body. They can live as spirits. A spirit literally means breath. They can live as breaths, invisible. They can travel around through the air, invisible, but they're still alive. Their minds are still alive. Their being is still alive. That's what it means to be a spirit. We have to be in bodies. The fall of man is, of course, what's being hinted at here in this famous diagram by Robert Flood. Now, I showed you this one before in other lectures. Robert Flood was a very great esotericist, mystic, philosopher from the 17th century. Very enlightened man, I think. And in this drawing, what he's showing you here is the creation. You've got the God at the top. You've got these rings of the angels. You've got 3 choirs of angels coming down. Then you've got the sphere of the fixed stars, and you've got the spheres of the different planets coming down, the elements, and then eventually you come down, you've got the earth itself in the middle. However, we see nature as a naked female. So this naked female here, she represents Mother Nature. God, shown in a cloud above, has her on a chain or lead. You can see he's got a chain. There's a hand coming out from this cloud. He's holding this chain which holds her by the wrist. She is his pet and he feeds her. You feed your pets, don't you? You look after them. But she's his pet. She can't do anything without him. Cut off the supply of energy and nature would all die. Yes, we know that. And she in turn is feeding all the life on earth with milk from her breasts. So you can see one of her breasts is shooting out milk. And there's all the different... You'd have to look at this picture in detail to fully understand this, but she's feeding all of everything that's come from her, the plants, the animals, everything. Meanwhile, at the centre of the diagram is man, symbolised by an ape. You can see him there, sitting in the middle. Now, as I say, I've done this before in detail, so I'm not going to go into this too much here. But he sits on a globe, studying an image of it and quantifying with his science. However, he too is on a lead, but to nature and not to God. In other words, he has lost his direct connection. Like a pet ape, he relies on her to feed him. He's lost his direct connection with God. So this is the plight of man. Yeah, we're living on this planet, but we're the pets. We're the slaves. We're controlled by nature. We cannot do anything without nature to feed us and give us everything. And she in turn is strapped to God. But we should have been directly linked ourselves. But we're not, because we severed that connection. So we have to rely on nature. And that has brought us to this whole question of life and death. Because of the fall, Adam and Eve were cast out of the Garden of Eden, which is to say the cosmic realm of spirit. So they've been thrown out of the spirit world. Instead, they had to inhabit physical bodies which could process the foods of nature. The food of the spirit was lost to them. This curse would fall on all their offspring too. Worse still, because they had accepted the advice and guidance of Satan, they were now contracted to him. Neither they nor future generations of humans could escape his enslavement, as they had nothing with which to pay off their debts and rescind their contract with him. So they made a contract with Satan by eating that from that tree, entering into this planet, saying that that's what they wanted. Yeah, we want to be on here. We want to be incarnate. Yeah, we're going to eat the fruit. And that has cut them off from the world of spirit. By his crucifixion, Jesus was able to buy back the human race. His blood is living blood, and it defeats our death curse. Now just take that in for a minute. This blood is still alive after 2,000 years. He rose himself from the dead. He had the power to raise others from the dead. Very significant. That curse was put on mankind by God as a response to the human race falling for the temptation of Satan to eat the fruit. What eating the fruit means is gaining energy second-hand from nature instead of directly from the breath of God, or Logos. Now, I've done the whole lecture on the Logos doctrine, so you should consult that. This is a very esoteric doctrine, but what we need to realize is that having put the curse on mankind, God could not break his own commandment. The only way it could be released is if a mortal carrying his Y chromosome from Orion would voluntarily offer his life in sacrifice. Because he was not carrying Adam's Y chromosome, Jesus was not subject to the curse. With his blood, he could buy us back. That's what's so unique about Jesus. Yeah, he's actually part alien. We're told right at the beginning that the angel appears to Mary and says, are you willing to conceive? And she says, yes, do it unto me, as the Lord has said. And she becomes pregnant and gives birth to this child, even though she's a virgin. And what that is that there's the implantation of this Y chromosome, which has come from God. The first fruit of this sacrifice was Jesus' own resurrection from the dead. So he comes up from the dead. Inside the garden tomb, there is a ledge on which the body would have been laid out. This is quite short, while Jesus was a relatively tall man for the times, nearly 6 foot. This being so, he would have had to have been laid out with his knees bent. That's important. They've had to put him down there, lying on there, but with his knees bent. It has to be understood that the purpose of such a tomb was not permanent burial. Dead bodies were laid out and left for a few years for the flesh to rot away. The bones would then be collected up, washed clean, and laid in limestone box called an ossuary. This would then be buried, perhaps in a family vault on the Mount of Olives. Many such ossuaries have been found by archaeologists, including that of Caiaphas, the high priest who condemned Jesus. Jesus, however, didn't need an ossuary. Within 3 days, he had risen from the dead and was able to converse with his family, friends, and disciples. How was this? This brings us to another sacred relic, the Shroud of Durin. I've done things on this as well. The image on this amazing cloth is not made with paint or pigment. It is burned on with some kind of radiation. It's like a 3D photograph of a sort that even today we could not duplicate. It seems a powerful light, like a laser, entered his body, projecting a whole image onto the shroud. In other words, the light came from within him and projected outward. The image was captured in the form of burn marks. Now, I'm not talking about, there are some burn marks on here from a time later on when the shroud caught fire. But the actual figure that you see, this is photographed in negative on the pictures you see here, show the burn marks made by this light, and they give us the picture exactly of what Jesus looked like. Beside the wounds made by the nails and from his flogging, there appear to be 2 wounds inflicted with a sword or spear. One goes into his chest and the other below his ribcage. You can see on his right hand side there's a spear mark or whatever in his chest, and then on the other side you can see a wound, a smaller wound into his abdomen below his ribcage. So that, I think, is the one that would have spilt the most blood. Although I must say there's a lot of blood come out from that chest wound. You can see the marks of it there. We can imagine that Jesus had a lot of internal injuries from his beating prior to the crucifixion. He maybe had a ruptured spleen, leading to a large amount of internal bleeding. The spear wounds would have released all this blood at once. That is why it was able to rush down the cross and into the hole. So instead of him bleeding over days from the little wounds, from the flogging and the hand and feet wounds, most of the blood had collected in his chest and abdomen. And when they speared him, it's like bursting a bubble, bursting an inflated balloon, and it all rushes out at once and goes down and down the cross and into the hole and to drip onto the ark beneath. A great deal of work has been done unveiling the meaning of the image of the shroud. It is so precise that investigators have been able to create exactly the posture in which he was buried. It turns out that his knees were indeed bent, which fits with the evidence of the garden tomb being his burial chamber. To summarize, the pieces of this puzzle fit exactly. Jesus had to die his horrible death on that exact spot at that precise time in order to pour out his blood onto the Ark of the Covenant as the perfect sacrifice at Passover. This had to be done in order to negate the covenant that Adam had been tricked into signing with Satan. Well, there's the thought. It had to be done exactly this way at that time. The blood had to be gathered in one big amount in his abdomen or chest and released at once to go down through the hole, where the rocks cracked, and to drip onto the ark, which had been placed centuries before beneath it. The subsequent resurrection of Jesus defeated death and thereby gave the human race a second chance, the opportunity for souls to escape the world of nature. Now, I don't know if you think about that. We all think how wonderful nature is. It's beautiful, oh, lovely nature. But actually, nature is a bitter battleground. Everything's eating everything else. Everything's fighting everything else. Everything's struggling for survival. It might look beautiful on the surface, but it's a very, very cruel place in actuality. We're told in the Gospels that 40 days later he ascended into heaven. This happened on the Mount of Olives in front of many witnesses. That's what we're told. Where did he go? From all that we have studied before about the rescue mission, I think we can surmise that he went to Orion. The Egyptians understood that Orion was the location of heaven. The throne of God, they said, was in the lower part of Orion. Other cultures knew this too, more specifically that the place of origins for the human race is the Orion Nebula in the Sword of Orion, which is in the lower part of Orion. And I've discussed that in another lecture as well. This is actually the closest nebula to our solar system. It is a place of enormous energy where stars are being born. You can see the bright light there in the middle of it. It's almost heart-shaped. Our solar system is in the Orion spur of the Milky Way, which seems to link the two main arms of the galaxy, the Gemini Perseus arm with the Sagittarius arm. So it's a kind of linking branch line between these two major arms of the galaxy which twist around the centre of the Milky Way. An enormous current of electrical energy flows through the Orion spur, feeding and driving the many star systems downstream from it. This wind is the local flow of the breath of God, which drives the entire universe with all its galaxies, stars, plasma clouds and everything else. I'll just stop there a minute. You've got to imagine that we live in a universe which is driven and powered by the breath of God, which at one level we experience as electrical currents and flows through plasma. This has been very much the work of some very gifted scientists that I know who've developed the whole concept of the electrical plasma universe, which has been totally ignored by the orthodox cosmologists of today. They don't want to hear about it. They think everything's big bangs and gravity waves and black holes. Absolute nonsense. The universe itself is connected, and the energy comes down what's the equivalent of wires, and it's more like, when we see all these stars around, it's more like looking at Blackpool illuminations where everything's connected up. In Blackpool illuminations it's done with wires, in the universe it's done with plasma streams. And our sun is powered that way as well by a plasma stream which comes through from Orion, from the Orion spur. But the Orion spur is not the centre of everything that exists. It's our gateway to the entire creation. 10 days later, on the 50th day after the resurrection, the apostles were gathered together in the upper room where the Last Supper had taken place. The pneuma hagion, which translates literally as the holy breath, descended upon them as tongues of fire. This was a manifestation of their reconnection with the breath of God. That's what pneuma hagion means, the breath of God. This is a real supernatural energy. The fire above their heads was plasma, glowing as the energy flowed into them. It activated higher centres of their brains and bodies, giving powers they'd never known before. And Jesus said, when I've gone, I will send the Comforter, my Holy Spirit, to them. And that's exactly what he did. This is the Comforter, the Holy Spirit, the Holy Ghost, the pneuma hagion, the breath of God, the Holy Breath. It enabled them to speak and understand other languages. In other words, they probably only spoke Aramaic, maybe a bit of Greek, perhaps a little Latin, maybe even some Hebrew. But they didn't speak all the languages of the world, and suddenly they were able to understand and to speak in all the languages. Now, I know that today people talk about talking in tongues, and they get themselves into a state and then they start gabbling and talking. They don't understand what they're saying. These guys did. And the people around them could understand what they were saying in their own languages, which they had never learnt before. It's because their higher mind is switched on and can activate and connect to all these different programs. You could call them computer programs, language programs, which suddenly are downloaded into their minds, and they can understand them all. Such is the power of the Holy Breath that they could even raise people from the dead. Above all, it gave them the courage to take the words and deeds of Jesus and preach it to all nations. This is the true Western way, but it is actually for the East, South, Northers too. It is our way to escape this planet and return to God. So I wanted you to understand this, that this is probably the most profound lecture I've ever done. And it's kind of all come together. And I've been taken on all sorts of journeys, rather like Ron Wyatt, to discover and search for different things. I put them together in my books. Now it's all coming together, and I'm beginning to see the whole picture of exactly why Jesus came here, why he had to do what he did, what it promises for us, how this is what's going to release us from this planet, from Satan's grip, and allow us to go back to become spirits again, back in heaven, and begin to explore the rest of this amazing cosmos that we find ourselves in. Because I don't believe that the angels of God sit around playing harps and singing and that's all they do is tell him how wonderful he is all day. I think there's work to be done up there, and I think there's things to be discovered and explored and knowledge to be gained, and I think we have a fantastic adventure ahead of us. But first we have to transcend our physical way, and it's like waking up from the matrix. Yeah, we have to wake up from the matrix, find our true selves, and then we can develop further. So thank you very much for your time and for listening. And if you can have it in your heart to like this video, I'd be very grateful. And also to subscribe to the channel, click the little bell. And if you wish to become a member of the college, and there's no pressure on you with that, you can do that through Patreon. You go to Patreon, just send a token of your appreciation if you like. You're not going to be examined on things. It's not like that sort of college. It's just the people who wish to be a bit more closely associated. So thank you very much, and we'll speak again.